When you're looking at shifting into a new career, that might not be the case. You might not be able to physically shift directly to what maybe you think is an equitable level within maybe a corporate world in relation to education. Sometimes it strictly is all about getting your foot in the door.
I'm Lisa Harding, ex-EdTech CEO turned certified teacher career coach. It wasn't all that long ago that I was recruiting, interviewing, and hiring teachers for roles in corporate America. Teachers that ended up being some of my all-time best employees. Fast forward through my own career transition, where I left my role as CEO to become a stay-at-home mom, I now work with and empower teachers to transform their lives by turning their once distant career dreams into realities. In this podcast, I give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you do the same. If you're a burnt-out teacher or simply need a change and you're looking to create a life you love, you're in the right place, friend. Let's get started. Welcome back, my friends. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to one of the Teacher Career Transition Academy's certified coaches, Shannon Schwabler. Shannon's here to guide us through considering the practical realities of changing careers. When you address these head on before embarking on a career change, you're able to remove a lot of stress and uncertainty and dive into your career change journey with clarity. Let's talk about the practical impacts of leaving a career in teaching to pursue the unknown. This is part 1 of a 2-part series, so make sure you check our channel for part 2. Now over to Shannon. Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Schwabler. I hope that you find this beneficial as you are embarking on a new season in your life and beginning to explore the possibilities outside of education. So I will get to share a couple of different topics with you and helping you dig deep, dive into career shifting, transitioning out of the classroom, and really doing a little bit of self-discovery, which is what today is going to be focused on specifically. So what would a training with educators be without some learning outcomes? So I'm just going to briefly go through these so we can dive deep into the content for the majority of our time this morning. So a couple of learning outcomes. As part of this training, you're going to reflect on the realities of a career change and how it can impact your life from a practical standpoint. So many of you are used to a teaching schedule. You're used to what that culture looks like. And so we're going to talk about what it might look like outside of the classroom. We're going to explore strategies to get your foot in the door for a new career and understand the difference in scheduling, very similar to what I just talked about. We're going to recognize some of those non-obvious differences. So scheduling, obviously, where you're working, August through May, but then you have the summers off. That's an obvious difference. We're going to talk about maybe some other things that have come to a little bit of a shock for those that have completed the transition out of the classroom. We're going to gain insight into questions to ask and networking strategies to make you feel informed about your shift into whatever industry you go to, because you don't want to be back here again in a year. And we're going to talk through some actionable steps so you can begin to embark on that journey. So we're going to dive right in. Each session I do will be about 30 minutes. And so that's really not a lot of time when we're talking about career shifting, career development, because it is an investment of time, if we're being honest. So wanted to talk a little bit about the realities of a career change. So when you're thinking about your current situation in terms of teaching, some of you may be a year into it. And so you haven't invested your entire career into teaching and lesson planning and all of those pieces that come with becoming an educator or being an educator. So this could impact each of you a little bit differently, if we're being honest. There's really not a one-size-fit-all approach when it comes to career development and career changes, but there are some base ground areas that we can cover so that each of you can take it in stride with whatever season it is for you. So the biggest thing that I think it's important to recognize when you're starting on a career shift and change is that sometimes that process is going to be just a matter of you have to get your foot in the door. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when we think about career trajectory, we typically think climbing up a ladder. So we're thinking, okay, maybe you're initially a first-year teacher, and then you move up to being a lead teacher on a team, and then maybe after that, you're moving into a little bit more of a leadership role within the school district, and maybe you're moving all the way up to principal, right? So that's kind of the hierarchy within education. So when you're looking at shifting into a new career, that might not be the case. You might not be able to physically shift directly to what maybe you think is an equitable level within maybe a corporate world in relation to education. Sometimes it strictly is all about getting your foot in the door. And so I think that's really the first thing that should be addressed head on, is that you might have to look at a lateral transition as opposed to an upward transition, and maybe even sometimes a downward transition. But we'll talk a little bit about how corporate looks completely different than education, and how that's not necessarily a bad thing either. So the other piece is that sometimes timing isn't perfect in these shifts, right? So life happens. I like to share a lot of times about career and the process of job searching, in that it's going to go slow, 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 right? It might seem like you are taking all of the time in your schedule to be creating resumes and writing cover letters and submitting applications and all of those pieces, and looking at job descriptions and deciphering on if it's worth your time to apply. But once that starts to kind of shift, when you start getting calls for interviews and then the interviews turned into offers, things start moving very fast. And so I'm in the belief that you should do a lot of front end work, so that when that time comes and that flip of the switch happens, you're ready, you're prepared, and you're able to respond in a quick manner, just like a lot of times the workforce does as well. So when you're looking at it, you might apply for a job thinking that it's going to start in May, right? Or after your school year. And that might not be the case. That might not be the timeline of what the school is looking for, or that might not be the timeline of what the organization's looking for. And so you might have to readjust and have conversations about, do you leave a contract early, and what are the implications of leaving your teaching contract early? Or do you spend some time not working and plan to work whenever something happens, right? And so that timing isn't always in that perfect alignment, because not everything operates on a school calendar year, especially within that corporate world time frame. And then sometimes the reality is you have to take your skill set you have now as an educator and move it into somewhere where you have to learn a little bit more, right? I am also within the world of education in my full-time gig, I typically say. And so when I look at the work we do as educators, we should be lifelong learners. And so this might be another investment of time as you're looking through the reality of leaving the classroom and starting and embarking on a new journey. Now, what I think is really important is, in the world of technology and you have the internet, you have all of these things, that training doesn't always mean that you have to go get a new degree. It doesn't always mean that you have to invest a lot of energy and time or financial resources. There's a ton of resources out there, and I'm happy to share a couple throughout this process. In addition to connecting with me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to share a couple of things that I have found beneficial in my own professional journey as I've learned the ropes of different industries. Couple of other career changes. So the reality is that there could be less job description or job security in some of these new industries. So I work directly within workforce development currently as a professional, and so what I look at is a lot of workforce trends. And so I swear every single day I log on to LinkedIn and I'm seeing layoffs in the ed tech industry, right? Or I'm seeing layoffs in I know Google recently did some. I know Coursera and LinkedIn, and sometimes recruitment for organizations is on the slide, because the demand for employees is not there, and so there's not always this security and knowing there's always going to be a need for teachers, right? But that's not a bad thing, right? That could lend itself to you moving into something that you really love, you find even more passion in, and it allows you to really, again, go get that foot in the door. And it doesn't mean that you won't have a job. It just means that sometimes there comes a little more anxiety with some of the industries that have a little more volatile cycles. And to be real, it's hard to leave, right? Every job that I've left has been difficult, because you develop these connections with people, and you have relationships with students, and it's your normal, right? We as humans have a struggle sometimes with that change, that process of change, and so the leaving and the unknown and all of those pieces sometimes make it hard. But you're at this place right now. You're taking this course because there's that inkling maybe that you are ready to move on and you're ready to adjust. And so the reality is it will more than likely be hard for you to leave pieces of your role, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be better on the other side. And it doesn't mean you can't continue forward in that area, which brings me to that final one. It's not always easy. Conversations with organizations when you're leaving are difficult, right? Because if you're not in the healthiest environment for work, it can be toxic, it can be scary, it can be nerve wracking, but then it also can feel somewhat like a breakup, right? When you're thinking about relationships, it's sometimes heartbreaking. So it's not going to be an easy conversation necessarily, but what's important is that we manage emotions, we manage the conversation in a professional way, regardless of if we're leaving positively or in a place where maybe we're excited to be out of the situation, because you never know who those connections will bring you back to. And so it's not going to be easy this entire process, but for many of you, it will be worth it at the other side, right? So I think it's important to recognize that there are steps of a career change that are going to be uncomfortable. You're going to see people within, the Facebook group. I've followed along as I've developed some of this content, watching, I've submitted hundreds and hundreds of applications, but I've not heard anything, right? That can be discouraging. That can be frustrating, but know that it's okay, because when something does happen, all of those pieces are going to be worth it in the end. All right, let's jump into some of those differences that I've talked about, especially at those learning outcomes.
Today's episode is sponsored by the Teacher Career Transition Academy. Our academy provides expert career coaching, professional resume and cover letter templates, small group coaching sessions, and a supportive peer network. The best way to jumpstart your career change journey is to enroll in my free Beyond the Classroom Masterclass. Visit teachercareertransitionacademy.com/masterclass to enroll now. I'll also drop the link to register for free in the show notes of this episode. This free masterclass is sure to kickstart your journey or give you the boost you need to move the needle if you're already in the career change process. Enroll for free at teachercareertransitionacademy.com/masterclass.
So work differences, the obvious ones, right? We all know that the work schedule is going to look a bit different. And so I think when we're looking at educators within K through 12, you think in terms of, okay, I'm working school year calendar. Maybe I have some obligations over the summer, but maybe I don't. Maybe I have those summers off. I know other ones in terms of potential work scheduling are holiday breaks, right? So a lot of times schools are closed over those winter holidays. So you've got a little bit of an extended break for holidays. That's not always the case in the corporate world. Your hours might be 7:30 to 2:30 or 7:30 to 3:30, whatever it might be. You might be, a coach in addition or a sponsor to an organization. So those hours look a little bit different. And then I would say the contracting process within corporate looks very different than contracting in education. So a lot of educators that I've worked with, they sign their 10-month contract, right? Or their school year contract, and you're only on contract for that year. And then you go through the renewal process, or it might be you're on contract for X amount of time and then you're renewed. There's not really a formal contract process from my experience within the corporate world. Now, there might be some underlying things that equate to a contract, but it's not an annual thing that your job is dependent on a contract, right? And so that's going to look a little bit different. I think that's the most obvious that most people look to when they're looking at leaving education. The other obvious one I would say is the time off availability, flexibility, and frankly, the accrual of leave. So, in education, a lot of times when you're leaving, right, or not necessarily when you're leaving, when you are needing a sub or you're needing to take time off, those sub arrangements have to be done. Those things to prep your class take a little bit more foreshadow or forethought to it. And so there might be some less flexible times for you to take time off, or there might be this push from your administration to not be out, or subs are hard to come by, just like teachers are, right? And so having that flexibility is not always there. And so making sure or thinking through that is going to be different. So a lot of times it's a little more easy to take, I would say, I maybe easy as a relative term, to take off work in a non-education role because of the just nature of the work. And there's not, if someone is out, yes, you might need to find someone to fill in for you for different things, but it's not like you have to prep a full lesson and have a full day's plan of work for your students. And then oftentimes you'll see accrual of leave for corporate look a little bit different. Now, going back to that first obvious difference in terms of work schedule, I don't necessarily view it as you're getting more time in the corporate world. Now, sometimes that is very much the case, but when you factor in, having some of those longer extended holiday breaks or summer, that kind of thing, you have it's really all about how you frame it and how you think about it, right? And so you still have those days off now. Your accrual leave obviously is paid leave and paid time off. And so depending on your contract within your school, that could look different. So again, that goes down to there's really not a one size fit all approach, because every school district manages things different, every organization is going to manage things different, but some of those things to think about as you're processing through, okay, what will work on the other side look like? And then work delivery, we've seen an explosion of remote work just due to the nature of the last few years, sorry, with the pandemic. And so you have the ability to solely look for positions that are remote. You might have that ability in education, but it's going to be a little more limited than some of these organizations that completely left their brick and mortars behind to dive into the remote work world. You also have that in-person environment where is, pretty obvious you're going straight to the office and back. And then you have those hybrid environments where you might spend 1 or 2 days in the office and then a few days out of the office, different things to that nature. But there's a little more flexibility, especially in your search when you're looking. There's more opportunities. The one caveat I will say is in some of the data that we're seeing is that some organizations, even though they thought they were going to invest into the remote side of the world, they've started to pull people back to the office. And so I think it's important that you recognize and think through that organizational standpoint as you're facilitating your job search. And we'll talk a little bit about job searches later on. All right, a couple of more obvious differences when it comes to transitioning out of the classroom. So you've got salary and benefit packages. This is going to look different, right? And I do a session in the class or in this curriculum about negotiation process. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to negotiate a salary and benefit package. However, you will more than likely see different monies on the table, right? You're going to see 401k contributions or the ability to do more with your retirement benefits. You're going to see some different health insurance benefits. You might see some different just wellness benefits in general. So you're going to see a lot of things that maybe are a part of the benefit package on the corporate side that aren't necessarily a part of the education side. And then obviously, I think a lot of people jump to salaries for teachers are typically underpaid. Teachers are underpaid in my personal opinion, right? And so when you look at salaries, I think a lot of people jump to, I can make so much more in X industry. And so that bottom line you're looking at, you're probably going to see a little bit different pieces, but we're going to evaluate what that looks like later on in this class. Then again, the type of work is going to look a little bit different as well. And so you're used to teaching, you're used to a environment that is centered and fueled around learning. Whereas in corporate, a lot of times it's going to be task or output oriented, right? And so you might be given a project and your work is solely dependent on the product that you create through that task or that assignment. And so thinking in terms of what types of work is going to be another obvious difference. And then there's organizational structure that's going to look different. And so within school districts, now this is a very simplified hierarchy of schools, right? Like I'm thinking you've got a principal, you might have an assistant principal, and then you have the staff that goes down from that level. I mean, within an organization, you're going to have teams of people, you're going to have departments of people, you're going to have CEOs, CFOs, all of those things that look just a little bit different than, a school. And again, my example within education is very simplified, right? So there's some schools that are very robust, there are other schools that aren't. And so looking at your experience in the classroom and the organizations you've worked with and translating it to the organizational structure within the corporate world.
Well, friends, that wraps up part 1 of this coaching session. But there's a lot more valuable information coming your way in part 2 that you don't want to miss. So check out our channel for part 2. And remember, friends, the journey is just the beginning. Embrace the adventure.